for it.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good night, whatever it may be, wherever you may be. As always, thank you for joining us. And I have a very special guest with me today, Dr. Massimo Pigliucci. I want to first, am I saying your last name correctly, first of all?
Yeah, it's pretty close. Yeah.
Okay. I'm sure you get asked that enough. But I am honored to speak with you, sir, only because you're somebody who would be the closest thing I can find to a modern day philosopher, or Socrates, if you will. And the way that I came across you, honestly, is I don't have a background in this vertical. I'm somebody who has a background in addiction and recovery, and the modality we practice is CBD backed. It's specifically REBT, schema therapy, and dialectical behavioral therapy, which are very rooted in Stoic philosophy, really.
Right.
So that had me looking into this topic more. And one of the questions I asked my computer was, who are the top 5 philosophers in the world today? And bing, bing. And I can't believe I'm actually getting a chance to talk to you. So I like to get to know people a little bit before we get into talking academics and stuff.
Sure.
But so can I ask you, just for fun, do you remember the first album that you ever purchased music-wise, that you ever bought with your own money as a kid growing up?
Oh, that's a good question. A couple of albums come to mind, but I'm very sure they were not the very first ones. Very likely, the first one was something that your listeners probably wouldn't know. It was an album by an Italian singer named Donatella Rettore. And she was very, very popular in the 1980s, late 70s, I guess, 80s. And I think she's still around, actually. I checked her out recently. So that might have been the first one. The first one that you might recognize was the White Album by the Beatles.
Yeah. Let me ask, did you ever get the chance to see them live?
No, unfortunately, no.
Okay, so that was going to be my next question was, do you remember the first concert you ever attended?
Again, there is 2 or 3 possible candidates. The most obvious one is an Italian singer, again, because I grew up in Italy, in Rome, sure. So that makes sense. Fabrizio De André was his name. He was a singer-songwriter. Strangely, probably the first one that American audience might recognize was John Denver.
No way.
Yeah. He came to Rome, and he was very popular at the time. And I went to see him. And at about the same time, a very young woman named Suzanne Vega, who then became very famous, in a couple of years later. But she was her first international tour, and I went to see her.
That's awesome, Master. That is really, really cool. Okay, so now to dive in, you're somebody who's written a lot of books, so I can't go through everything that you've written, but you do have 2 books that you have coming out in 2025. Mainly, one of them focused around Stoic principles. The other one I saw was someone taking an excerpt. It seems like a collaboration of a bunch of different writers that have contributed. And your section is specifically around, without getting too academic sounding, the psychology of anxiety and the contemporary usage of the word in today's vernacular. Is that a safe way to put it?
Yes. So there is a book that it's a collection. It's an academic collection of essays about anxiety and related emotions, and what is the philosophical perspective, or what are the philosophical perspectives on anxiety in particular, but also related emotions. So I contributed the chapter on Stoicism to that one. The other book that is coming out, it's actually called Beyond Stoicism. It's coming out in early January 7. And it's an exploration of a number of Greco-Roman philosophies. It includes Stoicism, practical philosophies of life. So it includes Stoicism, but we also talk about Epicureanism, skepticism, and a few others. I say we because it's written with 2 colleagues and friends of mine, Greg Lopez and Meredith Kuntz.
Well, okay, and here's the thing I want to ask. So how do you believe the terms anxiety and stress are commonly misused or misunderstood in today's conversations?
Well, so of course, the answers I'm going to give to these kind of questions are from a philosophical perspective, not a psychological one, because I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, right? So there are technical definitions of those terms in psychology, and that's fine, right? Psychology is a science. They do their things from their own perspective. But philosophers also have gotten into these kind of issues since the Greco-Romans, at least. So for at least more than 2,000 years. And different philosophers have different takes on issues like anxiety and nearby emotions, such as things like depression, for instance, or grief, even. From the Stoic perspective specifically, anxiety is an unhealthy emotion because it's basically triggered by someone being worried about what might happen in the future, right? And the Stoics, from the Stoic perspective, the future is not up to us. It's not under our control. And so it makes not much sense to worry about what the future is going to carry. What you need to focus on instead is what are you going to do here and now, because that's the best way to approach the future, to plan for the future, to try to shape things in the way that you prefer. So an emotional reaction based on fear of what's going to happen in the future from a Stoic perspective is not healthy. And so it needs to be countered with a more analytical approach, an approach based on, well, I seem to be worried about something. What exactly is worrying me? How much should I worry? What's the actual evidence that I have, for instance, that there is something, harmful coming my way? How confident am I that thing that I'm worried about is actually going to happen, and so on. And let me give you a very, very a personal and very small, in a sense, example, but it happened just very recently. So a few weeks ago, I was going out of town with my wife because she was invited to at an event where she was reading some of her writings. She is a storyteller and novelist. And so, okay, we're all ready to go. And it's exciting. We're going to be doing the weekend out, etc. And then I see on my email, the mail that is coming in the following week, because the Postal Service has this thing, you can subscribe to it. And they send you snapshots of incoming mail. So I just looked at it and I saw something from the IRS. I said, uh-oh, the IRS, that's never going to be good news. And so for a second, I was tempted to be anxious, essentially, about it. It's like, oh, sure, what is going to happen? And on Monday, I'm going to open the mail, and then maybe we are called for an audit, and we don't have anything to hide. But an audit is going to be a pain, and it's going to be stressful and all that sort of stuff. And then I caught myself, and I thought, hold on a second. You really don't know anything about what's coming. The only thing you know is that it's coming from the IRS. It could be anything. You really have no idea. So put it away, out of your mind for the weekend, enjoying your weekend with your wife. And then when we come back on Monday, we'll find out what it is. And that if, in fact, it is a problem, then we'll deal with it at that point. Okay, so I managed pretty well to put that thing out of my hand. Monday comes. I go to my mailbox. I open the letter from the IRS. It was a check. It was a refund. So, there was, in fact, nothing to worry about at all. In fact, it was something to celebrate. It was a fairly substantial check. So it's like, oh, okay, good thing I didn't worry about it, right? The point is that we tend to worry about things and being anxious about things when we have very little information. Because if we do have information, then we don't worry. We start planning for what to do, right? For instance, imagine a slightly different scenario where instead of the mail coming in from the IRS, it's an email. The IRS never sends emails, but let's say it's an email that I know for sure is from the IRS, and they say, yeah, we're gonna, you've been chosen for an audit. Well, there's nothing to worry about at that point. I know what's going to happen. So the thing to do is actually to act. It's to call my accountant and say, hey, we have an audit schedule. I need all my materials lined up. What do you think I should prepare, et cetera, et cetera. And so even that is not really a cause for anxiety. In other words, to be anxious about things that we know makes no sense because we know them. And so we're planning. Being anxious for things that we don't know makes even less sense because we don't know them. We don't really know whether there is something to worry about or not.
I get what you're saying 100%. I have similar stories, and I'm sure people listening can have some of their own. I had one where a boss told me on a Friday, I wasn't able to make it into the office that day, and he wrote me a text message back, okay, make sure you're in on Monday and you got your phone and your computer with you. And I called him immediately. I was like, what the hell does that mean? He's like, well, we got a systems update. You're getting a new phone. And I'm like,
Exactly.
oh, you know where my head went right away because of
Yeah,
my story of bringing your computer and phone and right.
of
But
course.
here's the thing I wanted to ask. I'm going to go away from my questions for a second and just give you my personal opinion to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah.
I looked up words, these two specific words, anxiety and stress, to find out
Yeah.
when they came into the English lexicon. Because when
Mm-hmm.
I do read old stuff from, you brought up Epictetus, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, they don't refer to those words. And I'm like, it's not that they didn't experience them, they just use different words. And
Yeah.
there's a part of me that thinks that when people use words like anxiety and stress, they confuse the emotional experience. Because if you're scared, right, and you say something like, I'm feeling fear right now, then you
Mm-hmm.
can get in touch with, well, what is it that's scaring you? But I
Yeah.
find that sometimes people, it's like an umbrella term of anxiety. And
Right.
it's like, well, what do you mean by that? Like, what do you
Yeah.
mean by you're feeling stressed? What are you actually feeling that you're describing as stress? Do you understand like where my thoughts are at?
Absolutely. And in fact, a related point is one that was made early on by the Stoics and is confirmed by modern research in cognitive science, especially by cognitive behavioral therapy. And this is the notion that emotions are not separate from our cognitive abilities, from our cognition. Right? We tend to think. Too many people still seem to think that emotions is one thing and cognition is a different thing, and the two are at odds with each other. So you either feel emotionally or you think about stuff, and there's a conflict and all that. That model of a conflict between reason and emotion comes from Plato, and that it was exploited by Freud at the beginning of the 20th century with his brand of psychoanalysis. But we now know that Freudian psychoanalysis is bunk. It doesn't work. It's not scientifically based. So that way of thinking about emotions and the relationship between emotion and reason is incorrect. The correct way to think about it is that emotions and cognition are deeply integrated. The human brain has literally billions of connections between the emotional centers, the amygdala, for instance, and the cognitive centers, the frontoparietal lobes. So we never, ever just feel an emotion. It's always accompanied by cognition. It's always accompanied by some kind of thinking, like the example that I gave you a minute ago, right? So when I saw IRS, I immediately felt, something at the stomach, right? Something is not right. Well, but then you inquire to yourself. I say, wait a minute, why would the word IRS cause discomfort? Oh, because you're thinking that you may be called for a audit. Okay, well, then what's going to happen if let's assume that you are called for an audit. What's going to happen? Did you cheat on your taxes? No. Then what the heck are you worried about? It's just going to be a little bit of a pain to put together all the documentation, et cetera, et cetera. Let's say that what is the worst possible scenario? That is something that the Stoics, and in fact, Albert Ellis, the founder of REBT, suggested that we do, right? So, okay, let's take a look at the possible future. What's the worst possible thing that can happen if you are audited and you did not, in fact, cheat on your taxes? Well, the worst possible thing that can happen is that you don't have all the documentation because you lost it, because something happened. Well, in that case, the worst thing that can happen is that the IRS is going to assess a fine. Okay, that's not the end of the world. It's nothing. It's not like you're going to die out of this thing. It's not like you're going to end up in the hospital or anything. It's something that happens, and that is the worst possible case scenario. The reality, it's often not the worst possible scenario. So once you start reasoning about these things, that feeds back into your emotions. That's the whole idea of cognitive behavioral therapy. That is, that you immediately, the therapist, the practitioner, prompts you to think through why exactly it is that you feel that emotion, articulate it, put it out there, and then challenge it. Albert Ellis famously asked his clients not to catastrophize. Right? So something happened. Okay, there is a fact here. Like the IRS, the letter from the IRS is coming. That's a fact. There's no denying it. Now, why are you catastrophizing? Why are you immediately thinking about, oh, this is horrible. It's a catastrophe. It's a really bad thing. It may or may not be. You have no idea. And you need to prepare yourself for a number of scenarios, but preparing is, it means that you're already on your way to actually solve the problem that seems to be bothering you so much. So this notion is, sometimes people tell me, oh, well, it's easy to say that I should, react this way or that way, but I cannot help it because I just feel that way. And that's bullshit, frankly. It's not true that we cannot help our emotions. Of course we can. Our emotions are not in the sense that, they're not under our immediate control. Like, I cannot snap my fingers and all of a sudden anxiety goes away, right? Or depression goes away. But it's simply not true. It's empirically not true that we cannot interact with our emotions. We cannot reason with our emotions and gradually, little by little, modify them because they are connected to our cognition.
I agree with a lot of what you're saying. And I wanted, once again, I'm going to get away from my questions and just keep throwing my thoughts to you in what you're saying. For me, I agree that a lot of people who especially come from my realm of addiction and recovery are very highly sensitive people, and many of them don't have emotional validation in their equation. They've grown up in households where being told to suppress their emotions is the best way to go about it, right?
Yeah.
And as a result of that, when we think of cognitive behavioral therapy and all the little modalities that have come out, and you think of Dr. Albert Ellis with REBT, you think of Aaron Beck with CT, in my opinion, they took very harsh approaches, which are very effective for some people. What they lack is what DBT, in my opinion, brings in, which is what you're saying, some of that emotional work that goes along with the cognition work. And I find that it brings a little more sympathy and empathy and compassion to the equation by validating or appreciating the emotional experience before moving into the education part of what we may say is the irrational or illogical thought. So, for example, and this is what I say to people, is like, if a kid comes running into my room right now and says, oh my God, there's a monster under my bed. And my response to that kid is to say, listen, kid, there's no such thing as monsters, go back to sleep. That's logical, it's rational, it's true, but it dismisses the child's emotional experience. So what I'm saying in this work, like anxiety exists. I'm not telling people that are listening right now that there's no such thing as anxiety or that you don't feel those things, right?
That's right.
What I'm saying is there's words that we could use to better understand them and appreciate the emotional experience while it's happening. If you're feeling what you're feeling, that's okay. Like, do you get what I'm saying with that, Massimo? Like, that sometimes we go too quick.
I agree.
Okay.
No, I agree. Of course, it is kind of interesting to use the example of a child, however, which certainly is an example of, in a situation which, no, it doesn't make any sense to just say to dismiss the child and tell him that there is nothing to worry about. It takes more work than just that. But even with adults, I hear you. You cannot just dismiss somebody's emotional reaction and say, you shouldn't feel that way. What does that mean? I feel that way, so what the heck? However, the flip side of that coin is that sometimes people use their emotion as an excuse for not engaging, for not actually reacting, right? Oh, I feel that way and I can't do anything about it. No, it's true. You do feel that way. That's the validation part, right? But yes, you can do something about it, right? And so now let's work on it together. If we're in a therapy session, or even if we're doing philosophical counseling, because sometimes people don't go to therapy to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but they go to a philosophical counselor if the problem tends to be more existential, let's say, than things like depression or something like that. So long as we don't use the existence of the emotion as a cop-out, as a way to say, oh, I give up, I can't do anything about it, because that's just not the case. So it takes time. There's no magic wand that you can just wave around and have things disappear at your will. It does require work, which is why, if the situation is difficult, you go to a therapist, right? Because you need the help of a professional. You need somebody who knows what they're doing and walks you through the steps of actually doing it. But the bottom line is we have more control than we think on our inner mental life, including our emotions.
Okay, let me ask you to that, because that sparks when I evaluate the expectations I have for others in myself. I ask 3 questions: capable, able, willing. Is this person capable? Is this person able? And are they willing? And I find that when it comes to something what you were just describing, when it comes to an inability to express oneself in a assertive manner, let's say, or behave in a way that coincides with living the life that they want to live, rather than reacting to emotions, where do you think, sorry, I forget where I was going with this. Where do you think, what was I saying there? Sorry to Massimo.
So you were talking about the capability, the willingness,
how does this fit in?
Yeah.
Do you think that people are lacking willingness when it comes to this practice, or do you think that they're lacking a capability or ability when it comes to, or is it all of the above? Like,
I think the answer, just like to any complex question, unfortunately, is it depends, right? In some people might lack the capability. For instance, children. Let's take the easy example: children, or perhaps an adult who suffers from degenerative disease, neurological diseases. Those people might actually lack the ability to react in a constructive way, right? They don't have the tools, or they lost the tools to do it. Again, probably the easiest example is that of a child who simply does not have the maturity to engage at a certain level with his or her emotions. So sometimes it is a matter of the ability is not there, right? Sometimes it is a matter of willingness, however. Because we live in a world where a lot of other people tell us, oh, you're right, you feel that way, absolutely, you poor you. Nobody should question the way you feel because it's your emotion. Well, okay, then that turns some people into being unwilling to actually tackle the problem. And in fact, in the worst cases, some people might get to identify themselves with that emotion. For instance, grief. Right, a certain amount of grief is certainly natural and unavoidable. Right, nor I think any reasonable person would say, "Oh no, don't grieve. If your loved one died, then you should not grieve." However, if grief keeps going for months and then eventually years, and it becomes part of your identity, right? You think of yourself as a widow or somebody who's lost somebody, and then that's the defining event of your life. That's a problem, because now you're non-functional. Now you're actually identify with the grief. The grief is what gives meaning and sense to your existence. That's problematic. Now you got into a pathology. And so now it's time to react. But that person might not want to react because they got comfortable in that situation. So I think it depends. A lot of us, I think a lot of people are somewhere in between those extremes that we were just talking about. Most of us are perfectly capable and willing to tackle their emotional reactions, their life, but they need to be given the tools. Right. So if you are a normal in the sense of, they're not affected by any pathology such as, depression or something like that, actual clinical depression or something like that. Most of us are perfectly capable and, I assume, willing to tackle our problems, but sometimes you don't have the tools. You don't know how to do it. Right. Which, again, that's where either a philosophy like Stoicism or a type of psychotherapy like CBT come into place, because they give you the tools.
They do, but what they don't give us, Massimo, from the beginning is that emotional maturity you're speaking of. When I refer to the child, I know we think of a 5-year-old, but let's be honest, that's me inside at times. Like I have a 5-year-old that still pops out at times, right?
Yeah.
And going back to that example, what do I do when I think I have a kid, or if I have a kid who thinks that there's a monster under their bed? I validate it, right? I'm like, what? There's a monster. Show me the monster. Right. And I run in the room with the kid. I look under the bed with the kid, and I really let the kid think I believe that there's a monster. I don't, it's authentic. There's an authentic validation occurring, is what I'm saying. Right. And that kind of stuff is what I think that people are lacking, is that they're moving really quick into trying to educate themselves without appreciating. I mean, internally, they get this thought or feeling, and then they have a part of them that's a harsh critic because they're starting to do this kind of work that just starts saying, oh, that's wrong, that's bad, you shouldn't be feeling that way. And that's where, the self-deprecation really kicks in. And I don't think it's effective for people. Let me ask you this: when it comes to living the life they want to live, how do people find that compass? Like, how do people know what the right thing that they should be doing is in a philosophical way?
Well, so in a sense, almost all of us grow up with a philosophy of life that we inherit from our parents or our society. Many times that philosophy of life takes the shape of a religion, takes the form of a religion. Religions, in my mind, are a type of philosophy of life. Philosophy of life, briefly, I define a philosophy of life as having three components. It has a metaphysics, that is a general account of how the world works. It has an ethics, that's a way to act in the world now that you know how the world works. And then it's got a set of practices, things like meditations or prayer or reflecting on scriptures or whatever it is, which are supposed to help you implement that ethics. So metaphysics, ethics, practices. Well, those things are common between philosophies of life, like Stoicism, Epicureanism, Buddhism, etc., and religions like Christianity, Hinduism, and so on and so forth. Now, if we accept, at least for the sake of this discussion, the notion that all religions are also philosophies of life, that means that almost everybody on the planet has a philosophy of life, right? So you just come into the world and you inherit one. The question, therefore, is not where do I find the tools, because every philosophy of life will give you some tools to deal with situations. The question is, are those tools good for me? Are they actually effective? For instance, and sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is no. I grew up in Italy, in Rome, as we were saying at the beginning of our conversation. And so I inherited the religion of my parents and my family. So I was a Catholic for the first few years of my life, until as a teenager, I thought, I don't think so. This thing is not working. So Catholicism was giving me certain tools. If I had troubles, I really didn't, because I had a pretty reasonable, nice childhood. But whatever problem I had a number of options, right? I could pray to God. I could read the Gospels. I could talk to my priest. And so there were those are tools. Those are actually ways to deal with the problems. The thing is, at some point, fairly early on in my life, I decided that wasn't going to be a thing. It wasn't going to work. I could not accept a lot of the metaphysics behind Catholicism, behind Christianity. So I had to look for something else. And the first thing that happened was that I embraced psychohumanism as a philosophy of life. And that worked for a long while, for a good number of years. But then I ran into a series of crises. My father died. I got hit by a divorce that I wasn't expecting, that sort of stuff. So it's like, whoa, hold on a second. What kind of tools do I have here at my disposal that might work? And it turns out that I did not have enough tools to deal with those suddenly stressful situations. And that's actually what got me to a search for alternatives. And that's where I eventually ended up finding Stoicism. So the bottom line is, we all come with adopting a particular philosophy or religion. Those philosophies or religions do come with tools, but there may come a moment in life where those tools, where you realize that those tools are not actually that good, or they don't work for you, or whatever. And then that's the time where you want to pause and look around and say, okay, what else is out there? Let me try something else. Right. Well, so some people try Stoicism, some people try Buddhism, some people try other things.
And in yours, Massimo, would you say that, it's not as black and white as I went from Catholicism into Stoicism? Is it that black and white, or is it more of, I've used a concoction of everything I picked up along the way to create what I consider principles of my philosophies,
Yeah, that's a good question. No, initially it was really black and white. It's like, nope, sorry, I'm done with this thing. And yes, this thing seems to work. Then eventually, so when I embraced Stoicism about a decade ago at this point, the basic tools worked very well for me. And so it really clicked. It's like there was something like, okay, this thing is working. Now, of course, with years of experience, having studied a little bit more, having practiced a little bit more, I can begin to see, okay, but there are limitations. There are some things that don't necessarily work very well. And so now it's getting more nuanced. Now I'm also helping myself in a more eclectic way, if you will, to other approaches. I borrow things from other philosophies. But that's what the Stoics themselves actually did. Seneca was one of the major Roman Stoics, and he helped himself to other philosophies. He was quoting Epicurus, for instance, which is definitely not a Stoic. And at some point, one of his friends asked him, he says, wait a minute, you're a Stoic. Why are you quoting Epicurus? And Seneca's response was beautiful. He said, look, the truth is the truth. It doesn't matter who says it. If somebody says something that is useful, I'll take it. I don't care where it comes from.
Well, and that's really interesting because Epicurus, like I said at the prior, and to my listeners, I'm no Stoic expert, but he's somebody I get put in line when people mention Stoics. They mention Marcus, they mention Epicurus. So you're saying, no, he's not. What is the difference between Stoicism and Epicureanism?
Oh, wait a minute. You might be thinking of Epictetus.
Epictetus, my bad. Yes,
Epictetus definitely was a Stoic. Absolutely.
Okay, my bad.
Now, Epicurus was the founder of a rival school to the Stoics. And Epicureanism essentially says that the goal in life is to achieve tranquility, serenity, to have a serene life.
Oh, he was the hedonist guy.
That's right. He was the hedonist guy.
Okay.
The way you achieve a tranquil and serene life, according to the Epicureans, is by not only enjoying pleasure, with moderation, but most importantly, trying to avoid pain, avoid both physical and especially mental pain. So that was their way of life, and that's yes, it is a hedonistic school. The Stoics, on the other hand, thought that, well, if there is pain, there is pain. It's just a fact of life. You just need to deal with it.
Which is that's more in reality.
I think so. Pain is just a reality of life. For instance, let me give you a specific example. One of the specific differences between the Epicureans and the Stoics was that the Epicureans thought that you should try to stay away as much as possible from political and social involvement because politics causes pain. Okay. They had a point.
Sure.
Politics does cause pain. So their reaction was stay away from it. The Stoics thought exactly the opposite. They said, well, yeah, sure, politics and social involvement cause pain, but that's a crucial component of a human life. You want to be involved with other people. You want to make the world a better place for yourself, for your family, for your friends. So you have to get involved in politics. Politics, not in the sense of partisanship. They were not suggesting that
who you
sign up for the Democrats or the Republicans. Yeah. Politics in the broad sense, the word politics comes from polis, which meant city. So involvement at any level in the social life of the city.
I'd say, that is it better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all? I think it's better to have loved and lost, right?
That's right. Exactly. Exactly. And that was a Stoic attitude. If it's something is worth doing, even if it causes pain, then it's worth, you need to do it. And then you deal with the pain because that's part of life.
And it's, what, man, because I love my animals, and inevitably I hope to outlive them, and saying goodbye to them. And I've already had some that I've said goodbye throughout my life. I'm sure others have as well. It hurts. Does that mean I'm not going to have animals? No, I love every moment. Right. Okay, I want to ask you, we're kind of running low on time, so I want to ask you one that's more of a fun question to kind of wrap up. And that is, sure. As I said, I'm not an expert on Stoicism, but the four that I always hear when we talk about the subject is Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, sorry for messing that up, Seneca, and Zeno. Those are the four that most. So if I was to ask you today, we're going to build a Mount Rushmore to not recognize those four, but four others. Just so that I can go looking, and maybe my listeners can too, for some other people that may be worth going to find out. Let's say we're building that Mount Rushmore. Who would you put up there, Mass?
You mean four other Stoics?
Four others. We're not, because I know that those would be the four that most people would put it.
Right. So I would say Chrysippus, who was a Stoic, one of the early Stoics. He was a famous logician. And he probably is actually more responsible for shaping Stoicism than any of the other ones put together. So Chrysippus is a name that you don't hear often, but that ought to be there. Musonius Rufus, who was the teacher of Epictetus, and again, we don't hear much about him, but a lot of what Epictetus learned came from Musonius Rufus, so it's worth checking him out. A guy named Hierocles, who wrote a book on ethics that has some really interesting ideas about how to become a cosmopolitan, how to develop a cosmopolitan attitude. That is, how to develop the attitude that everybody on earth is our brother and sister. So that's the third one, Hierocles. And then the fourth one will probably be Panaetius. Panaetius was one of the so-called middle Stoics. It was not one of the early ones, but it came before the three big ones that you mentioned earlier. And Panaetius developed an interesting theory of role ethics, according to which we play different roles in life: father, son, friend, colleague, etc., and then we need to learn how to juggle these different roles in a positive fashion. So these are the names: Chrysippus for his contributions to logic and to sort of systematize the Stoic system. Hierocles for his contribution to ethics, Musonius Rufus because he was teaching Epictetus, and Panaetius because of his theory of role ethics.
I love it. And you know what? I didn't write them down because I've got this recorded and I'm just going to listen to that again. But
right.
I may ask you in an email to send me some links because sure. It's not always easy to find these people. But I do appreciate you taking the time. Now, I want to talk to you for a few more minutes. So I'm going to sign up, but do you mind just sticking around for a couple minutes with me?
Sure. That sounds good.
Guys, I really appreciate Dr. Massimo taking the time, and I hope you enjoyed listening to me talk to him as much as I enjoyed talking to him. But as always, if you do appreciate the content, go down, hit the like button, hit subscribe. Until next time, peace out, y'all.